What's up, everybody? I'm Caleb Bishop, coming at you live from Pitbull Audio here in San Diego. Today, we've got a very special guest live stream with Dan Lee and Peter Brown from Roland. Dan's the product manager of Roland's US operation, and Peter Brown is the product planning manager of their global operation. Today, we're going to be talking about the history of Grooveboxes. It's a legacy that spans decades in synthesis, sampling, and sequencing, and we couldn't be more excited. So, without further ado, let's get it going.
Hi, I'm Roland Allison. I'm here to show you an amazing box that's changing the face of techno and hip-hop music production. The Roland MC303 Groovebox. This is an instrument that many of us in the dance and music world have been dreaming about. It's a compact sequencer and sound module with killer real-time controls and all the funky Roland drum and synth sounds that have driven progressive dance music creation for years. Classic Roland's rhythm and synth sounds such as the TR-808, 909 rhythm composers, the SH-101, MC202, and TB-303 bass line, plus Juno and Jupiter synths. These are the same sounds that have put techno and hip-hop music on the map.
Love that video.
Truly a work of art. So Dan, Peter, how you guys doing today?
All right.
You know, it's been pretty interesting kind of getting the video setup geared towards this event in such a short amount of time. I had literally no equipment, and then my coworkers really helped me kind of get everything set up and coordinated. And it turned out really well. I mean, you know, we can have like face on cameras, have something like this. Everybody's getting into streaming now, which I think is really cool. So I'm doing pretty good, I guess.
It's awesome to see it working out. What about you, Dan?
I'm doing good, man. It's been a crazy couple days, and it's been a wild ride these past 2 months. I definitely miss seeing you guys in person, and if we could have done this in person, it would have been just as awesome. I'm just saying that. Thank you so much for having us.
It's
We're
an honor.
really excited to be showing you guys our legacy that spans literally for decades, and it's super fun to be here and to be able to talk nerd with you and everybody on the chat.
Awesome.
So let's get right into it, right? And let's talk about the history of the MC. The history and the legacy of the MC Grooveboxes really spans into something like this guy. This guy right here is the MC8, and this is the very first programmable CV gate sequencer. And this thing, when it came out, was ridiculously expensive. It came out in 1977, and the idea came from a Canadian guy named Ralph Dick, who showed Mr. K, who was the Roland founder, and he showed him a single channel TTL-based sequencer, right? So it's transistor-based. It had timings based upon electrical pulses, and he showed Mr. K. He's like, what do you think? Mr. K is like, this is an amazing idea. I can't believe you can have a standalone a standalone sequencer, and you can actually get any synthesizer and sync it and make literal songs. And Mr. K was inspired by that. Our founder literally went back to the lab. He got his smartest guys on this case and was like, hey, what if we made an 8-channel sequencer? And that's why this thing's called the MC8. So it's called Microcomposer because this is the very first sequencer that used a microprocessor to really drive the CV gate polyphonic sequencer. There were only 200 pieces made. And in 1977, this thing cost $4,795. And if you calculate for inflation, that's over $20,000 for a sequencer. If you think back and you think about the technology that we have now with across various different manufacturers, to pay $20,000 for a sequencer is wild. So this thing right here, when it came out, it only had 4 kilobytes of RAM. And when we talk about that in the modern era, you're like, okay, 4 kilobytes. In what that means is you can only input about 1,100 notes. And Roland knew at the time that even for that standard, that was relatively a low amount of memory. So about a year into production, they offered a 16 kilobyte upgrade. So 4 times as much memory. And now you could input 5,300 notes. And this device was really aimed at the professional electronic musician, which were kind of burgeoning at the time, right, in the 70s. And you had guys like Yellow Magic Orchestra, Giorgio Moroder, Kraftwerk, Human League, Toto, all who have utilized this amazing piece of equipment to make and create actual songs. In fact, this was our ad in the UK. It was a 2-page advertisement. Insanity for a box that literally revolutionized sequencing as we know it today. A couple years later, down in 1981, we realized that the MC8 it's very expensive. And so what we wanted to do was to make it a bit more affordable. We downsized it from an 8-channel to a 4-channel sequencer. But you had these cool little add-ons. So just like how you saw in the previous MC8, you had a CV add-on. With the MC4, you now had a digital cassette recorder. And look at that thing. That thing, it's wild. So you had 4 channels. It was a smaller, lighter brother. It had expansions, and it not only did it have these 2 CV interface and the digital cassette recorder expansions, but it also had a CV to DCB module. And what DCB was at the time, it was pre-MIDI, and it was a way for drum machines like the TR-808 and the Juno 60 to all be synchronized together, right? But in addition to that, as a couple years later, as MIDI launched, there was actually an expansion that not only added CV and DCB, but it was a totally different module that added CV and MIDI. And that's really cool. And this thing has been used by guys like Vince Clarke. Aphex Twin has been known to use this. It's a really super cool, and is really the burgeoning idea of what Roland wanted to begin with in creating these standalone devices. Because at the time, standalone sequencing wasn't a thing for electronic instruments. If it was huge. You had to have this incredible wall full of synthesizers, and you had to patch everything. It was intense. So to have everything self-contained in a box like that to sequence was really, really revolutionary at the time. The first sort of foray, and I don't have the photo available to me at this very moment, but the evolution of the MC8 and the MC4 really turned into something called the MC202. And the MC202 was the very sort of introduction of this idea that you could marry a synthesizer and a sequencer together. So let me expand this out for you. And so if you're familiar with Roland gear, the MC202 released in 1983 in a similar fashion and looks pretty much like an SH101. This thing cost $595. It slots literally in between an SH101 analog synthesizer and programs like a TB303. So it introduces that concept of being able to sequence in a box, but combines that with a synthesizer built into it. And that synthesizer is a monophonic oscillator synth. So it is just like the SH101, but unlike the SH101, it didn't have a couple things like noise generation. It didn't have the assignable LFOs. So that wasn't a thing. And artists like Otakar, John Frusciante, Joris Vorn, Richie Houghton, when he was doing Plastic Man, all of these great artists utilized the MC202, kind of like in a way like and here's the MC202 right here. In a very similar fashion, like almost like a poor man's 303. And I don't want to say that like the 303 wasn't, it was fairly affordable once people started to discover the MC202. But what I mean is this was also a lead and acid-based machine that people realized you could really use this for dance music production. And that's something that's really cool.
So were there any modulation possibilities outside of without LFO or anything like that? Or was it pretty straightforward, just angry bass oscillator?
It was pretty much a very angry bass oscillator.
That's awesome.
Super tweaky.
I like that.
Yeah. So you have this MC. Go ahead.
A lot of those artists are newer too, as far as I can tell from that list, right?
Yeah. So you've got guys that were trying to discover dance music in the 90s. And although this device came out alongside, and this MC202 commercially was a flop. And very much like how the TR-808 and how the TB303 gained their notoriety in dance music, because the MC202 didn't really hit, it wasn't a home run product, but because of its status and because of what it was able to do as an analog synthesizer, a lot of guys who were experimenting and being inspired by the generation before them really gravitated towards boxes like this, because now you had a cheap, affordable way to make music, right? And that's why a box like this is super cool, because when you look at it, you're like, okay, it looks just like a synth. I don't need to get a keyboard. I can do all my programming inside of a box like this. I have things like LFO. I have my oscillator there, and it's basic enough where you could learn introductory synthesis and understand what does the ADSR envelope do? What is an oscillator? What kind of sounds can I get out of this? And you can really go ahead and tweak it. And once you learn the MC202, how to program a synth, then you can go and start to experiment with maybe more expensive synths like the SH101, which it has almost, I have an SH101 and it looks exactly like this. Of course, it has an actual keyboard, and it has our signature pitch bend mod wheel stick. But once you learn synthesis on one piece of gear, you can pretty much take that knowledge and bring it over, which is why a lot of people, when they start to learn synthesis, maybe they might go for an SH101 or they might go for a Juno 106, because those interfaces are very simple. You select your oscillator waveform, and then you understand, all right, well, there's a filter that does this, and then there is an envelope that allows me to shape the sound like this. So pretty cool stuff.
I personally couldn't agree more with that approach. I definitely find that the best way to learn for anyone that's getting started in synthesis as well. It can be really overwhelming with the amount of presets and stuff out there, but starting just with the oscillator, getting to the filter, and just going down the line truly is an experience like nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. And then if we start to delve into the history, so that those three pieces are really sort of the construction, the building blocks of where we start to begin this historical journey is we now are introduced in 1996 to something called the MC303. And the MC303 is labeled as a Groovebox. So this term Groovebox, we've actually introduced with the release of this particular product. Now, right under me is the MC505, and I will get to that in a little bit. But let me move this out of the way and let me feature this guy. This was the very first idea and evolution from the MC202, whereas the MC202 introduces a programmable synthesizer part. Now with the MC303, and although the MC303, if you listen to some of the sounds, like let me play it for you right now. You get this like almost nostalgic early 90s techno sound, because these were the instruments that were creating those tunes. And so you have this MC303. It came out in 1996, cost $699. But rather than just being able to program drums, which is what traditionally what our boxes like these were able to do, and yes, the MC303 had a sequencer with a synthesizer in it, but it didn't have drums in it. But now you had the ability to add drums. You can not only do bass parts, but you could do pads, you could do leads. So now you really had an entire sort of synth station at your fingertips. I have an arpeggiator on here. So like, and you can play the keys just like as if they were a piano, right? And it's laid out. You've got C here. And if you hit the white keys, you can do a major scale. It's really super cool. These aren't velocity sensitive, meaning that as you play them, it gives you the same volume as you press the key. But again, this concept of marrying and really being the next evolution of the drum machine, where now not only can you build entire drum tracks, but you can build entire songs into a box like this. That video that we started with featured a guy named Rylan Allison, and he was part of the original LA sound team when Roland had a research and development sound team here in Los Angeles. It was also headed with a guy named Eric Persing, who you may know now from another great company. But this sound team went ahead to create some of the sounds inside of this box and really revolutionized really dance production as we know it, because now everything was self-contained. This thing is, say, no more bigger than my laptop's keyboard, and I can make whole tracks on it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's like one of the mindsets that I've learned from talking with a lot of the engineers, a lot of the people that were kind of working on these products individually, was the MC303 especially was the kind of the first product to give you a completely self-contained solution for music production, not just a synth that had a sequencer, but you also had drum parts and you had interesting melody tools. I think the products that were out at the same time, they didn't really have that kind of collection of resources available. You had like really famous samplers, you had, of course, like standalone synthesizers and instruments like that. But the Groovebox was like everything you really needed to make in a song is in this portable package, you know, and it has like the kind of, as Daniel said, the familiar keyboard interface, which I actually really like. The keys on it feel so interesting. They're kind of scalloped upwards and kind of feel very ergonomic to the fingertip. It's really interesting. So I think it's kind of the mentality of the Groovebox started off as being like something to give music production to everybody, whereas the alternative was making music in a really expensive studio, or like hiring studio musicians or renting out really expensive pieces of gear. They were like, well, let's just put everything in one box, make it really easy for the user to play, and people can do it from their own home.
Yeah, it's really amazing how, like you said as well, like 10 years prior to this coming out, basically it took a whole wall of gear to essentially compose a dance track, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really amazing just the concept in general really fueled an entire generation to like actually be making dance music. Like without that kind of workflow change and that approach, I feel like music would be so different today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of
isn't that a wild concept?
It is
like for that to change, literal one box to change the entirety of how we know music production to be. Then we kind of evolve into the next, what happened after the MC303. So the MC303 was pretty successful. And then a couple of years later, in 1998, we released the MC505 Groovebox. And this was a literal expansion of the 303. So if you take a look, if I compare this to the 303, you'll notice it's very similar in color. It's got those same scalloped keys that Pete was talking about. But now you have so many things expanded. You now have a part mixer. You have your filter section literally taken out and put onto the machine itself. So now everything's a lot more accessible. My particular unit here, this is our museum in our product support departments.
Yeah, where's the bass boost?
So you'll notice that there are some knobs missing from this being well loved from that era. But the MC505 came out in 1998. It cost $12.99. Everything got upgraded. So not only do you see everything, can you interact with everything, but now it's a 64 voice polyphonic subtractive based synthesis, right? So it's virtual analog. This synth engine derives from the JV1080, which was a rack mount synthesizer at the time. And if you're familiar with R&B music at all, the JV1080 really drove a lot of early 90s R&B. So a lot of those pad sounds, a lot of those tracks, you'll hear the JV1080 all over that. And that synthesis engine is brought over into the MC505. And I should probably mention, to go back one step, which I didn't do, for the MC303 at the time, this was a 24 voice polyphony based on the structure model of the JV80, which was also a sound rack mount sound engine. So you start with the JV80, then you go into pretty much what becomes pop music's almost most popular rack unit. And to this day, I think the 1080 is still really beloved by a lot of producers. But you have that entire synth engine now built in onto the MC505. And at this time, you'll notice that there's something called D-Beam that was very popular on a lot of our units moving forward. But this entirety of its technology had 512 built-in presets. You could do 256 user sounds, so you can customize sounds, you can build them as you want, and then save them in here. And then you had 26 rhythm sets. So you had things like the CR78, the TR808, 606, 909, 707, even the R8, which a lot of producers used at the time. Everything's inside of here. Now, the thing about these guys, about the 303 and the 505, is that these guys didn't sample. So these guys weren't able to do what the competition like the Akai boxes did, meaning you can bring in something that you took off of a record or something that you heard on a CD and then incorporate that into your production. But what this was really for the guy who wanted to make an entire track in the box starting from scratch, right? So alongside this box, there was something really cool that came out as a promo for this, and that thing is called At Home with the Groovebox. And it was a really cool little promo CD done by, at the time, Grand Royal Records, where after the Beastie Boys left Def Jam, they connected with Capitol Records to create Grand Royal. And with Grand Royal, we collaborated together with them with a lot of great artists. Like you've got guys like Beck on here with scratches from my man's DJ Swamp. You've got Cibo Matto, which in my opinion is one of the greatest 90s groups ever. You've have these like incredible artists that all they had was this box right in front of them to create entire tracks. And if you're on Spotify or if you're on Apple Music or something like that, or you have Amazon Music, you can stream that and check it out. Because of copyright issues, I can't show you the tracks, but it's a really fun concept to think about. Hey, let's give all these artists an MC505 and see what they can come up with. Super cool.
Sounds like a good deal on both ends.
Right? They get new gear.
Everyone's having a good time.
Right. Everyone's having a good time. So the MC505 was really geared towards not only dance music producers, but because of the JV 1080 sound set, also to hip hop and R&B producers. So it was a lot of people found the 505 much more accessible than the 303. They found the workflow on the 303 a little bit limiting because you had a lot of shift functions. You didn't have everything at your fingertips, but now with the 505, you did.
Yeah, I've got a close friend that actually recently saved up and bought an MC505 specifically. Like he sought it out and he was like, this is just the right amount of control. Sequencer is simple. And some of those sounds from that sound palette, you know, they're digital, but they're used a lot in modern electronic music today. I think kind of either sampled from or kind of inspired by some of these interesting digital sounds and PCMs that were originally on Romplers. You know, you couldn't really mess around with them. So at least the MC505 had some hands-on control, and you can start to tweak those and get some really what sounds like fresh sounds now from a box that's from the 90s. So it's interesting how things kind of cycle back.
Absolutely. And I find that to be the coolest thing, where these are instruments. So just because some of the sounds sound dated doesn't mean that you can't discover them in a new way. And that's what's really fun about our legacy, is you have so many different palettes to choose from. The effects might be a little dated when you combine them with the sounds. And so that might be a wall that you might run into. But the idea of having all of these sounds at your fingertips really makes these boxes really strong. So after the 505, in 2002, I'm sorry, not the 505. In 1999, so a couple of years after that, comes the MC307. This is a scaled down MC505. Because the MC505 had so much inside of it, what Roland wanted to do was to make it a bit cheaper and a little bit more accessible for the guys who couldn't afford that price point of $12.99 at the time. So this piece came out around the $700 range. Was again a scaled down MC505, but had updated presets. You didn't have all of those control knobs that the 505 did, but what they brought into it, and what this started to really create as our engineers realized, hey, you know, a lot of these producers making these songs, these dance songs or dance music based songs, are also DJs. So what if we put a turntable emulation knob onto it? And what this literally does is, if you're playing a track, you can use this like a pitch fader on a turntable. It's actually kind of cool and really kind of wild that something like this would even be there. So as you'll notice, if I move the pitch fader up, or if I move it down, it acts just like if I'm spinning on a Technics 1200. And you've got these little buttons here, these hold and push buttons, where if I press it, it can go all the way down in pitch, but still sounds super cool. And you can get like a kind of like a modern chopped and screw type of effect. And then here you've got the BPM where you can almost double it if you would want it to. So if you wanted to go like take an R&B song and try to see if it would work as a house song, you can do that. in this case, drum and bass maybe. But this little box, again, you've got a sound generator with 64 note polyphony. You had 8 tracks inside of here. You had 24 assignable MIDI CC knobs, and you had 240 dance music presets. Wild. Like to bring this more into the affordable range, to be more accessible to more people, is really sort of where we start to see the MC307 start to shine, and a lot of people really got into these groove boxes at the time because of the accessibility and the affordability of these boxes.
I really like that preset song, I'm not gonna lie.
It's dope, right?
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah. And then one thing that that's not labeled MC, but I just thought is super cool because it looks like a creamsicle, is this guy. This is the Roland D2. Pete knows about this, as he I used to see this on your desk. This, even though it doesn't look like it has all of the effects and the knobs, in 2001, this thing was released around the $500 range. But this little box that doesn't look like much, and it might look like a Chaos Pad or something to you, if you're like, what is this? This thing is actually a 600 patch preset. It has 30 preset drum kits and has the same waveforms equivalent to an MC505. So if you have the MC505 editor, you could actually edit patches inside of this thing and utilize it as a full-on sound source. So for $500, even though it doesn't look like much, this thing was really powerful. It still is powerful at the time. If you want to take a couple peek at the tunes, I've loaded up a preset. It's kind of silly, but what I find pretty cool are these little buttons over here. This in what's called the D field, and what you can do with this is you can do these little effects. And I'm a DJ. I moonlight as a DJ in my bedroom, and so what you can do is kind of do these like almost like scratches. It sounds kind of crazy. You can do snare rolls. It's really silly, and what you can do and the sounds that you can actually get out of this, aside from the presets were probably not ideal, but what you get, and if you're looking just for sort of like a secret weapon, take a look at the D2. It's based off of the MC505, and is
Don't sleep.
Really
Do not sleep on the D2.
So is that capable of motion sequence recording, or is it just kind of like all live on the fly with that unit?
With this thing, because it's MIDI capable, if you sequence it, you can take advantage of a lot of different parameters inside of the box.
On the D field as well?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So on the D field, you can do like sound, you can add effects, right? You can have it assignable as a filter. So you've got these three, you got sound, and then these little things here. An ad-lib, which is brought over from the 505's D-Beam. If you heard the track in the beginning and that little silly solo thing I was doing, I clicked ad-lib on the D-Beam and moved my fingers around. You can do the same thing on this pad as you get an XY axis. And then you have this kind of cool thing. It's called spin, and you can kind of use this as you would a turntable, and you can slow up or speed down sounds. It's actually pretty fun to use. Then we come over to the MC09, and I'm not going to plug this one in just because I don't have enough space here. But this thing came out in 2002 alongside one of the most notorious boxes, the MC909. But this was the MC09, and this was a virtual analog. Let me get rid of this. This was a virtual analog piece, and was really intended as the next evolution of the TB303. But what you see, and why I'm bringing this piece up, is you have this thing called the audio looper. And we'll see why this is important as we move on into the current generation of groove boxes. But this idea of having a synthesizer, having a rhythm section, and combining that with 4 what we call phrases is now we start to see, okay, we're bringing in some sampling elements, and we're able to bring those elements of recording tracks alongside building tracks. So now you're able to do these and add these really cool maybe soundscapes that you may not have been able to do before on an MC303, a 307, or a 505. But now, because of the sampling capability, you have this thing called the audio looper, and we'll see why that's important in a little bit. So all of that leads to this behemoth, and the reason why I keep moving around things a lot heavier than I actually thought it was.
I now understand the notoriety of that one.
This thing was legendary because it was pretty pricey at the time. So in 2002, this thing was $1,795. So $1,795, almost $2,000. But because of that, there was nothing on the market like this. And whereas the D2 and the MC307 really built off of the MC505, the MC909 is based off of the best synth module that we had at the time, the XV5050, and was really the first Groovebox to have its own sampling section. So not only previously on the MC09, you had this thing called the Phrase Lab, which you can bring in sampled phrases, but now you had a literal chop, emphasis, combine, time stretch. You can do normalization to your samples. So you had much more control over your samples. And this thing sounded great. Here's a little ditty I have here. Let me bring this up. So again, this turntable emulation that we saw at the introduction of the MC307, this has brought back a lot of the sort of ideas from the MC505 are brought back. You've got the part mixer. Now you've got your filter section and LFO. You've got all those hands-on controls come back because, of course, at this price, you got to have that. And so now you can bring in parts. So and then again, if you wanted to do sort of like that idea of chopping and screwing, you can do that instantly. You can double the BPM if you want. So it's really accessible. This thing sounded great. The wacky thing about the MC909 is that it has 2 D-beams. So if you weren't happy with D-beam before, you get double the D-beam now in the MC909. And now you can choose between, you can either do a solo, you can have a filter with cutoff and resonance, you can have it act like a turntable stop, or you can even assign a different effect to the D-beam. Like you can do different filters, you can add an effect maybe to like a flanger or something like that. So if you wanted to, I don't know, do something like that with your hand, as it registers, it's actually kind of cool. And this demo song is the business. This thing's awesome.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things to play around with when I started in tech support. That was at my desk constantly because of course I had to learn it to help people kind of navigate the unit. But you know, it was just so fun to use, like the hands-on control. As you said, the sound quality is actually really good comparative to some of the other digital stuff that was on the market at the time. And it was just really flexible. Like, you know, as Daniel said, it had a full sampling engine in it on top of like the time stretching that you could do with it. It's just awesome. And it's like a tank too. It weighs a ton. It's like
this thing, as I was bringing it up to my desk, I was like, oh, I'm not built for
steel, right? There's like all this like crazy IO on the back too. I mean, it's really, it's all metal. It's kind of nuts.
So was
And
it capable of things like FM or internal resampling at all, or like kind of pitch and
this
time?
absolutely could do internal resampling. It had time stretch built in. This was the first MC that featured USB out, so you can combine this with a computer, and you can actually edit your patches using an editor. It had digital audio out and in. You had external inputs that you can bring in, and these were needed because if you wanted to sample, you would have to have these. Of course, your typical MIDI in and out. But if you take a look at the bottom over here, and I unscrewed this for our pleasure, is you now had this removable and upgradable DIMM RAM slot. So now, if you weren't satisfied with the amount of memory that wasn't inside of the MC909, you could actually go out and buy up to 256 megs of RAM, which at the time is just insanity. For 2002, there was nothing else at the time that really had that kind of power in a box alongside a synthesizer. Oops, did I bend this just now?
Oh no.
Alongside of a fully one of Roland's best synthesizers, literally stuffed into a box where you can sample. You have a drum machine. This thing's wild.
Seems like this one was kind of the big leap that happened, I guess, that led to where we are now with the MC707 and whatnot, and like just kind of not so much on the miniaturization aspect, obviously, but the capability of that seems so much crazier than everything else coming before it. Like, obviously, growing incrementally, but like that was impressive, definitely.
Yeah, and it had different modes where you could actually sequence. So if you weren't comfortable utilizing the step sequencer, you had a real-time sequence capability as well. And you could have used this in a lot of different ways, and you had a ton of effects that you could have applied to that. It's really great. Sorry, Pete, I cut you off.
I mean, I think it's probably the closest to, as Caleb said, kind of the mentality that we took with the MC707. And it really kind of served as like a, I want to say like prologue or prelude, kind of just a hint of like what the MC707 would be. But still, I think it's still a great machine even to this day as well. Like if you can find one, it's definitely worth it. Like, you know, with the song mode, that the turntable aspect of it too is probably my favorite part about it.
Absolutely, 100%. And after the MC909 came the MC808, and you would think, well, 8 comes before 9. Why was it after? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer to that question. But with the MC, go ahead.
I don't question those things either. It just happens, it seems. Either way, excited for a new box.
Yeah, but this is the last sort of vintage box, and where my part of the legacy here, and my rambling kind of stops after this. So thanks for sticking around, guys. This thing came out in 2006 and was a lot cheaper, a lot smaller, and it used plastic at the bottom. So this one's a lot lighter and a lot more manageable. But if you notice, it's got a very similar style to another legendary piece of equipment in the SP series. So if you've ever taken a look at an SP404, you might notice a very similar layout and look as a result from this particular piece. So the MC808 now doubled the polyphony from the MC909, and you can program now more than a million notes. Why you would do that? Well, let's say you wanted to I don't know, recreate an entire Bach symphony in an MC Groovebox. This is it. It's capable of utilizing up to 1 gigabyte flash cards up here at the front. So right here, you got this little guy. The problem with compact flash, though, is that it's really slow compared to speeds nowadays. But it could do a gigabyte of compact flash. This was now expandable to 512 megabytes of RAM at the bottom. So just like how I showed you the MC909, you could do the same thing and upgrade the RAM inside of here. The MC909 featured an expansion card, expandable capability called the SRX, which was also in a lot of our keyboards at the time. And you can throw expansion boards to get more tones into the MC909. Unfortunately, the MC808, because it was a lot cheaper, almost $500 cheaper, it didn't have the SRX capability, but it takes the polyphony, meaning how many notes you can program at the same time. It brings it up from 64 previously on the MC909 to 128 polyphony on the MC808. Excuse me.
And it's got
with the MC808 as well. You have motorized faders now, which is something. So now if I just play a track, turn the volume up. Still get that like really sweet Roland sound that I think I'm just a fanboy of. But what's cool about this particular thing is as you go, and you'll notice that as I go into my different songs, these faders you can adjust them and save them exactly how you want them to be. So as you're going through your different songs, you could actually move these just like a real mixing board, and that's pretty sweet for the time. If you've ever listened to a Jean-Michel Jarre track, he used this on his album Tio and Tia. He used a preset from this guy on his actual album. Pretty awesome to find that there are sounds in here that are good enough to be on an actual release. So a lot of cool history here.
I noticed a bit of a lo-fi kind of sounding grid on that one. That does seem a bit reminiscent of the SP404 as well. Is there a different sound card in there?
Yeah. So as we went up, a lot of the A to D converters were different. So if you're listening to a bunch of these different boxes at the time, whatever A to D converters were available were what was used at the time. So all these boxes actually sound just a little bit different. For instance, the D2 has this really incredible lo-fi compressor, which is important. And what Peter's going to talk about in the new boxes. But what these things allowed you to do, again, was to bring that sort of idea of however you want to create tracks. If you want to make them lo-fi and gritty, if you want to make them really pristine and clean, you had that control because you had this ability to add a bunch of effects and things like that. But this thing at the time, it had a very similar, to answer your question, Caleb, yes, it does.
That's cool. I think it might have just been the track too, but I really enjoyed that. That was a cool palette there.
I also had a filter on that as well. So it might have been a filter combined with compression. But yeah.
I think, the differences between analog synths are much talked about, but really there's a lot of differences when it comes to just like different digital models that might contain the same actual PCM data, but the output stage will sound totally different. You know, that's why people look at products like the JD800 versus the JD990 that technically are identical, but there's some mysterious sound difference between the two. It's kind of a fun thing to kind of go over and compare.
Yeah, and just to take a look at it, which then brings us to now. So there's been a gap since 2006 until 2019 when we released the MC707 and the MC101. And those groove boxes take all of that lineage that we've talked about. So the synthesizer idea that we've talked, these synth parts that we've talked about, they're now upgraded into what's called the Zencore Engine, and Pete's going to talk more about that. You've got incredible flexibility now with with drums and one shots. You can combine them with the kits that are built in. You have a drum plus compression track now where you can have up to 6 lanes of compression and add that per sound. The thing is phenomenal. It takes the concept of audio looper that we saw on the MC909 and has its own track type called the looper track that Pete's going to break down for you. But the MC707 and the MC101, which is what we're about to talk about, those groove boxes are now the next in the legacy of the history of the MC groove boxes. And Pete's gonna run you through that. But if you guys have any questions or wanna ask in the chat, we're around. But check out these new MC707 and MC101 groove boxes.
Thank you, Daniel. So MC707 takes all that lineage of MC products that we just went over, kind of takes the best concepts and then transforms it into a box that takes what and how people create modern music today and makes it accessible, again, with the whole all-in-one type of mindset. So what you get with an MC707 is you don't just get a synthesizer type of engine, but you get a sound engine, sampling, looping, time stretching, basically like a portable DAW that you don't need to really struggle to learn, or you can take this basically wherever you go. It's a way to kind of get away from the computer and get into some interesting, just a way to connect with the music on a standalone box. So the way that I have it broken down right now is that we have the 8 tracks that go across the top. Struggle to learn, or you can take this basically wherever you go. It's a way to kind of get away from the computer and get into some, so basically we have the 8 tracks going across here that could be configured towards drums. We can see that the notepad here is able to trigger those sounds. Right here I have kind of a synthesizer sound. Here I have a kind of a lead sound. Already the sound definition of everything is like a lot more hi-fi than if you kind of A/B it with previous models, and it should be. The sound engine that we're using is something called Zencore, and Zencore is a common engine that's powering different products. Like MC707 runs Zencore, MC101 runs Zencore. Also behind me, that Phantom, that keyboard there, is also running Zencore. So you could really you can basically explain the MC's engine as being our best sound engine to date in a Groovebox format. It like punches well above its weight when it comes to just the fidelity of everything. So in addition to really easy playability, I can take that synth sound here, go into the menu, and then I have this really nice screen that shows me all of these different options. I have up to 4 layers that I can stack with a sound that could be a sample or some of the virtual analog that's going in there. It even comes with a huge collection of PCM waveforms. So if you don't like synths, if you like more acoustic sounding sounds, it actually has a ton of things in it. Like if you want a grand piano, you can pull up a grand piano for a track. So it's really cool. You know, it kind of gets a very easy layout for tweaking. As you can see, I'm kind of looking at different aspects of the sound. If I come to the filter here, I can adjust the parameters like that. Or I can use some of the hands-on controls that I have here to do the same thing. So if I go to the effects section here too, I have over 90 effects that I can choose to put on all of these sounds. So it's a really versatile sound source. Even if you're not using it for sequencing, you can get so many interesting tones from it. So that's kind of what the synthesizer engine looks like. Before, let's take this drum beat that I have here. I can go into the drum editor and then see a breakdown of what is on each pad. So if I take this snare hit, I can do things like pitch it up, pitch it down. I have things like release control, pretty much all the essential things that you need to create a song. You have quick access to using these knobs. The MC707 is basically structured in what I like to call basically 3 levels of complexity. The top level is all creation. You basically pull up a preset, you can lay it down, record whatever you want. It's really easy. You don't even need to touch the sound engine. For kind of the next level down, we have that screen that we checked out before. This is a very easy to use tone screen. So people that are familiar with using software synthesizers or DAWs or virtual instruments, they can feel at home here because it has the same exact parameters. Now, the bottom level where we can, all the hardcore programmers and people that really like to design their sounds from scratch can go in a level deeper and find every aspect about the sound engine laid out all across. And there's dozens and dozens of things to play with here. So it really fits whatever mold the customer's skill level is at. And I think it's just a really intuitive way that it's structured. So let's talk a little bit about sequencing and kind of playing things back. So at the home screen here, you can see that I have a visual representation of 8 tracks, and they're broken up into clips. That means that I can take one drum beat, for example. I have this one beat that I played earlier. And if I want to switch to something new, I can basically switch and create discrete loops to kind of progress through a session. And it's a really kind of convenient way to do things because I can start to mix and match different patterns. So this is just a drum beat, but I can bring in a couple of instruments right here. And I can bring them out perfectly in time with the music. So it's a really kind of flexible way to do things, especially if you're performing live or you're just jamming out in the studio and you want to see what works. It's a really nice thing a really nice degree of control for everything. So Daniel mentioned about audio loops, and this thing has the capability of either sampling or loading in audio loops that can be time stretched. So it's really kind of a very convenient way to import a session from your computer and then break it up across all the tracks, or you can kind of come up with something on the fly. So in this session, I have kind of like a chopped and screwed type of loop here. But if I progress through the session, I can pull up different types of sounds, like vocal samples or anything that I want to see in a loop. And then if I fade everything up, it's all in time. So that's a really kind of nice way to start to experiment not just with internal sounds, but with external instruments that you have. If I was a guitarist, I can go plug in things in the back, I can record a loop, and then I can build a drum beat around it. So one last thing about the MC707 specifically, this screen that I have on now is amazing. I really love it. It's the scatter section, and it kind of is a master effect that you can use to chop up and create really dramatic effects across basically whatever track that you want. So if I play this back, you can do things like pitch shifting, reverse effects, or I can do things that are like a lot more atmospheric. So I really like these two sounds. Like that type of processing, you can only really do in a DAW, I think. And they've included it and they've made it into such a hands-on way to get these crazy effects kind of deployed so smoothly that I spend most of my time here, even just like chopping up loops that I made in Ableton or something. I can load it on here, mess around with it, re-record it back into my DAW, and come up with some really cool and creative things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was just sitting with a mouse and a keyboard. I mean, this is just more fun in general.
So if I may interrupt you,
yeah, sure.
that idea of scatter, and if you've ever used scatter on something like a TR8 or a TR8S, this version of scatter that's in the new MCs is completely programmable. So scatter on the older boxes, the TR8 and the TR8S, on those drum machines, they're all preset. You only have the ability to go from 1 scatter to 10. So it only gives you that sort of range to work within. But this scatter function inside of this box is that next level to where you can add granular function. You can add grit. You can slow things down and halftime instantly. You can add those sort of like SP404 type of effects if you're into like the DJ effects looper type of effects, but you just want to use a button. There's so much you can do with that scatter function inside of there. And there's actually a scatter, what I would call the scatter designer, to where you can go into the scatter function. And if you go into that menu, and Pete, I don't know if you can show them real quick.
Yeah, sure.
If you go into that menu, you can literally go in and design whatever sound you want. And then you can change the color of that pad so that you're reminded that that pad is going to be that effect that you always wanted. So the scatter function here isn't just your typical scatter. It's a brand new upgraded engine to where you can have complete customization over your live effects.
Yeah. And it sounds totally insane. I mean, if you take a pattern, so that's what that effect is. It's kind of like a beat repeat. But if I go in, I can say, what if I want to pitch that one up an octave? Or some completely, up a fifth. Or down. I mean, it doesn't really matter. There's a lot of control that you have access to. Like, it gets really, really interesting very quickly and easily. So on top of that, so you have, scatter effect, which is really engaging. You can point it to individual tracks as well. So we were kind of listening to it across the whole mix, but something that I like to do is I get a pattern going, and then I can point it to, let's point it to the synth engine right here. So just to recap what I just did, instead of affecting the whole kind of sound at the main output, I can actually point it to a specific track. And if I want to keep that, I can resample it to one of those audio tracks that I was doing. So it's a self-contained music production solution that lets you do things really creatively and really fluidly. On top of that, just the structure of everything, the levels and all the knobs here provide some really nice performing capability. You also have a sequencer here, so you don't have to kind of look at a screen or use a mouse to edit notes. You can do it physically, and it's great, And so one of the concepts that I talked about before, the Zencore aspect, it's shared with a bunch of products. So this guy will actually run sounds and projects almost verbatim. Yeah, basically verbatim up to the first 4 tracks. This is basically a 4-track version of the MC707. The MC101 is perfect if you just want something that's only 4 tracks in depth and that basically has the same sound engine. So all that fidelity that we were talking about earlier is accessible with this. So that, and it's just really conveniently sized. It's kind of like a Game Gear. I don't know if you guys messed around with Game Gears ever.
Showing your age, dude.
Yeah, I know, right? This is basically has that kind of feeling. Let me quickly plug this thing in, drop that down. Shout out to the VR 1 HD video mixer that I'm using. Put this back up. Oh yeah, so Caleb might like this one. He likes the lo-fi grit stuff. So I like to do all lo-fi stuff on the 101. I don't know why. So think about small boxes. I'm like, yeah, let's just like dirty it up somehow. So this is a really basic beat that I made, I think on an airplane or something.
Back when that was a thing.
Back when, yeah, airplanes were a thing. So I have like drums on track 1, a synth pad on 2, bass on 3. And I can just go to town. You know, here's the drum pads. Just similarly, like the MC707 has, I can switch between different pad modes to do different things. If I want to record that, I can sequence it in like this, or I can play it in. So if I want to play it in, do this.
Can you show the size relation if you put them side by side? What does that look like?
Look at that.
Insane.
One cool thing too is with both of these, automation is really easy. You just hit record, move a control. And it'll remember that automation. Or at least generally it does. There we go. So you can enable and disable automation. MC101 has it in a menu, whereas this has it on a kind of a physical knob. So there's some features that are kind of nested in the 101, stuff that's a little bit more advanced, but it's a really nice box to just kind of pick up and play. Loading sounds is really easy too. So I can go into a blank track here, hit tone, drum comp, looper, whatever I want. Say if I take a tone track, I can load something that's either from a preset from the built-in library, import it from a project, or WAV file. Do it again. WAV file. And then navigate whatever's on the SD card, which I can basically have, I think 32 gigabytes is the recommended size. Take a sample like this. Or, that's kind of funny. Let's do that one. And then it maps it to the keyboard, which is pretty cool. Do a little bit of that. And I can just kind of do that for a very long time. But yeah, both of these things, they kind of fit whatever scenario that you want it. This one is battery powered, so you can bring it with you on a backpack if you should ever break quarantine and go anywhere ever again. That's probably the machine to take with you. So one could argue that the MC707 is perfect for staying in your apartment or your house and creating beats. So those are the modern MC products that take kind of all the design and some of our best concepts from the lineage of MC products that we've released, you know, over the course of 2 decades, and comes up with the modern take on what is it like to create modern music today. What are the things that are important for a producer or a composer, and what is a form factor that is really friendly to use and is fun above all else.
So one thing about the MCs that is really kind of difficult to show, but is really cool, is that, remember we talked about with the MC909 and the MC808, we talked about those two groove boxes having the ability now to connect to a computer.
Yep.
These MC707 and the MC101 now takes that a step further, because not only can you utilize a computer and you get an audio interface, you get MIDI, so you can use and Jay's over here from our product support team in the chat, you can use that literal box as your keyboard too. So if you're on, again, if you're in an airplane, if that ever happens again, or if you're hanging out. I like to go outside and in my backyard and just hang out and just make music sometimes. I can just have my laptop on the side and I can just use that little MC to program things inside of something like Ableton or Logic. And I can use that not only as a sound source, but I can use it as a controller inside of those digital audio workstations as well. But not only that is now you get access to something called Roland Cloud. So if I open up my Ableton session and let me duplicate my screen here. Bang, burn. Ta-da. So now as you see my Ableton session here, I can load up something that's called Zenology. And Zenology is free. If you buy an MC101 or an MC707 and you sign up for Roland Cloud, you'll get a 30-day trial, but you'll be able to keep this thing called Zenology. And what Zenology is, it's bringing your Zencore engine, so the same synth engine that's available on the MC101 and the MC707, on a Phantom, on the RD88, on the AX Edge, on all of those products right now, you can have that same synth core and bring it into your DAW. And now you have the capability of getting these expansions. So remember on the MC909, how I talked about you had the ability to add those SRX literal chip card DSP cards, and you can get more sounds out of it. Well, now you don't have to buy an expensive $250 card anymore. You just have to pay $1, and then you can get a brand new tone set. So if you look, if I open this over here, and then we go over here, these things now called SDZs, these are going to be my expansions that I'm able to get. And look, for $1, I get all these different expansions. And I should probably set this to B. But anyway, you get all of these tones. My point is you no longer have to pay a ton of money to get extra tones and to expand your sound set. You just have to pay $1 for an expansion kit, and you can expand all of these tones. So this is just one pack. This is called the Twisted Trap pack. We've got a Lo-Fi Beats pack. These are the only two that I've purchased so far, but just because I wanted to check them out and see how they sounded. And they sound really good. And you're not paying that much more to get those expansion cards, again, like you did with the MC909. But there's real capability, and there's now the ability to take this a step further, to utilize your computer in a really different way. So not only can you utilize the instrument to produce, and you can do your entire mix down because it's an audio interface, right? But you can expand your tone set. You can import samples. So if you want more drums and more one shots, you can bring them in. The sound set is really endless, and now you have a lot of power to be able to deliver and to create music just like how you want, whenever you want, whenever that inspiration strikes.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I like how the concept of miniaturization and portability just keeps pushing forward. Like, even started with the first boxes, obviously, but now you're just taking it to another level with the clouds, basically, and how you can just control and transport these sounds from any medium, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of those production techniques that you learn now on the MCs, you can bring them over into a DAW environment. So if let's say you're a standalone guy and you're like, I'm only going to use a PC, cool, no problem. But let's say you want to get into computer production later. Now you have a foundation to be able to bring your skill set and your ideas and your thoughts of, I produce this way in this piece of gear. Now I can transition into, if ever you want to, if this is even something that you want to do, you can transition that knowledge set and produce on a computer, no problem.
I think there is a big resurgence there too, as of the last couple of years, as far as people like kind of getting tired of the computer, getting tired of that, like you said, Peter, the whole constraint of a mouse and a keyboard. And like, this is just so much more inspiring for a lot of people. So hardware is definitely an awesome approach to like just be able to channel someone's creativity in a way that they wouldn't expect necessarily, but then it's like a second, language to them.
100%. Man, any questions from the crowd out there in internet land?
Or if anyone,
if you're in, oh, go ahead.
If anyone's feeling inspired after Pete's performance there, I know I certainly am. We've got fresh 101s and 707s in, so be sure to check out our website for that.
Super fresh.
Thank you to our friends Ed Diaz and Scott Berry.
Thank you,
and Jay Barra hanging out in the chat room.
Yeah, thank you guys for everything. This has really been fun.
For sure. Any questions from the gallery? Pete, you got something you could play while we're waiting for questions?
Like old school classic one.
All right, so we've got a question from Scott Berry. He asks, can you use the MCs as a sound source? You absolutely could use it as a sound source. If you just wanted to use it inside of Ableton and you wanted to just program sounds, keep playing, Pete. Keep going. If you wanted to use it just as a sound set, Jay actually put up a great video on the Roland product support page where he's utilizing the sound source, the MC as a sound source, but programming everything in Ableton. You can totally do that. With the MC, you get 4 tracks. With the with the MC101, you get 4 tracks. With the MC707, you get 8 tracks. So depending on how you want to use it, you can use the MC707 as an 8-part tone generator, or you can use it as a 4-part tone generator if you have an MC101. So you could definitely use it just as a unique sound set, because you get 3,000 sounds on both of these boxes. Everything from acoustic pianos to synth basses to pads to, I think there was a harp in there that I found the other day and was like, I would never use this, but it's cool. You got a bunch of strings
all the time, man. Bells and harps are like my jam.
I know you do. There are Hoover sounds. So I was hanging out with my buddy Basek, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm just here for the Hoover sounds." I was like, "Whatever floats your boat, dude." On the 101, there are a pair of stereo outputs. On the 707, there are 4 outputs. There's a pair of stereo outs, and then a pair of assignable outs. And on the 707, you can assign what sound you want to go out of what output. On the 707, I should probably go bring mine. But on the 707, what you can do, it also has effect send and return. So you can use the effect send and return either as a mono channel, so you can send maybe just the left channel and then bring it back if you wanted to use a chorus pedal, or if you have a stereo delay, you can use both of those left and right channels and then feed them in. You could you have an external input on the 707, so you can sample just like you could have on the MC909 and the MC808. You have chopping functions now, and the sampling function was a little bit limited at release, but now that we're a couple firmware versions in, we can now do chopping. You can record one shots, you can record synth tones. So if you're like Pete and I, and you have a little modular setup and you want to make cool little synth presets, you can totally do that. Is there an update roadmap? Alan asks. There is not an update roadmap yet. I wish we could share more information with you, but if you're interested, the 1.50 update just dropped, and what that does is that feature that I showed you by importing tones off of Zenology, you can do that now with the with the MC series. As well, now you can copy and paste bars. So let's say you're programming on the MC101 and you're doing a 1-bar loop, but you want to make it a 2-bar loop. You can now hold shift, press your measure button, and you can extend that and literally duplicate the bar. So you can duplicate bars now on the MC101. That's something that you could only do previously on an MC707. So you've got workflow functions that we're always looking to upgrade on these boxes.
Always moving forward.
Always moving forward. John asks, I like the presentation. Will you be going over other products? This was the history of Grooveboxes. So we're just going over all the Grooveboxes here. Unfortunately, no. John says he's looking for something to mesh with vinyl. If you have a DJ mixer, you can sample right into the MC707. You can sample still into the MC101, but you do it via USB. So what you would have to do if you're like me, you love vinyl, you can just record it into any recording sound source that you have coming out from your DJ mixer, and then you can import it via USB into your MC101. There is a really clever workaround that somebody found utilizing an iPhone or an iPad to import sounds into an MC101. So you should probably check out that video if that interests you. Super cool.
And just
Gary said,
sorry, go ahead.
Gary asked, I just added a Pandemic TR8S to my room. I love the cloud, the System 8, SPD-SX, JXI. Thank you. Kevin asked, can the sounds from the Roland Cloud be loaded into the HPD-20 hand sonic? So the answer to that is, unfortunately, no. You can't do a straight one-to-one transfer. You'd have to turn them into samples. The new Zencore engine allows us to bring tones from these different instruments and to allow them to import them into the associated instruments. But with our older technology, because they're not on the same platform, they don't work exactly the same way. So you can't import sounds like you can in this current series of instruments.
So for anyone that came in late to this video and wants to see the rest of it, just update. We will be uploading the entirety of it to our Facebook and as well as YouTube.
On YouTube, that's a good point. Azerdy, sorry if I butchered your username. He asks, how many internal samples and patches do the units come with? The MC707 and the 101 both have the same sound set. They come with 3,000 tones, so 3,000 instrument presets, and 80 drum kits. So things like 808, 909, 707, 606, CR78. You have genre kits like an EDM kit, drum and bass kit, hip hop, R&B kits. You got a ton of sounds you can work with. Synaptic Flow asks, do the boxes have MIDI in so you can connect a keyboard controller? The answer to that is yes. Both of them have MIDI in and out. The MC707 has 2 MIDI out ports. But to go back and answer the question, you can plug in a MIDI keyboard into either the MC101 or the MC707. All you have to do is match the MIDI channel number to the track. So for instance, on an MC101, you have 4 tracks, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. As long as you set your MIDI controller to control 1, 2, 3, or 4, that's the sound that you're going to be able to control with the keyboard. Really cool. Meaning, if you wanted to do drums on the MC707 or an MC101, and then you wanted to play keys on top of that, that's something that you could consider doing because you're controlling the MIDI functions are going to be independent. There is a MIDI implementation chart, which Jay always likes to remind me. Meaning that there's a list of what MIDI function controls what. So if you have a really advanced MIDI controller with sliders and pads and everything like that, you can find what value affects what function. Chip said, wait, I missed that. There's an update for the MC post 1.5. No, I'm just saying that 1.5 update just came out. That's our brand newest update. Well, do that again, Pete. How'd you do that? Sick.
Yeah, man.
So after this stream, this video will be uploaded to the Pitbull channel. So you guys, if you're coming in late and you wanna go and review all the history, we went over a ton of instruments. My living room looks like a war zone. These things were heavy, almost broke my back during this session. So thanks so much for sticking around. Pete and I and Caleb are really grateful that you guys took the time out of your day to come check us out. So if you're interested, the stream's going to live on after our live session. So thanks again.
Thank you.